I'm Rebecca Ritters. Welcome to the program. Russian forces have carried out multiple airstrikes on a military training ground near Lviv in western Ukraine, killing at least 35 people and injuring many more. The assault brings the war closer to the border with Poland and threatens the relative safety of Lviv, where many Ukrainians have fled since the invasion began. In Kyiv, the mayor is telling residents to prepare to fight as Russia's military attacks civilian targets nearby.
Fire crews rushed to the scene after a mortar struck an apartment building on the outskirts of Kyiv. The artillery shelling started at around 6:30 in the morning. There are people living in these apartment buildings, civilians. This is a suburban area here. With Russia stepping up its bombardment of Ukrainian cities, including the capital, it's feared more and more civilians will be caught in the crossfire. Satellite images show Russian forces just 25 kilometers from central Kyiv. President Volodymyr Zelensky has promised Ukrainians will put up a stiff fight in what he's calling a war for the country's independence. We have no right to let up in the intensity of our defense, no matter how difficult it is. We have no right to let up in the force of our resistance. The enemy is bringing more columns into Ukrainian territory. The besieged port city of Mariupol continues to bear the full brunt of Russia's bombardment. The humanitarian situation is worsening by the hour for hundreds of thousands trapped without power, running water, or fresh food. In the nearby southern city of Melitopol, which has already been taken by Russian forces, residents turned out to protest against the alleged kidnapping of their mayor and to demand his release. As fighting rages, people in and around Kyiv will be hoping and praying that last-minute diplomacy could still spare them the worst of what has happened to other Ukrainian cities.
And DW's Matthias Berlinger is standing by for us in Kyiv. Matthias, fierce fighting on the outskirts of the city now. How is the situation there today?
It's the same as yesterday, the day before yesterday, and all the other days before, almost since the beginning of the war. There's fighting on the outskirts, ceasefires and fighting, fighting and ceasefires, and the Russian troops are regrouping, but they're not yet advancing on the city. Most people have left the city and are waiting, or have fled the city and are waiting outside. Those who are left are trying to stay at home as much as possible. There are roadblocks, etc., etc. It's pretty much like it has been for at least a week.
All right, well, let's take a look out. Overnight, Russia escalated attacks in the west of the country, firing several missiles at a military base near Lviv. What more can you tell us about that attack?
Yeah, there is some important military infrastructure in Lviv, and there have been bombs falling in that area before, or rockets rather, hitting that area before, but it has stayed relatively calm after the first days of the war there, and now in a new round of attacks on strategic goals, Russia has shelled this military airbase. Similar things have happened to other cities that have been relatively peaceful in the past few days. From time to time, the Russians target one of these military airports or bases. Yesterday it was an airport and an oil stock, oil stocks near Kyiv that had been set onto fire. So Russia is continuing to target the hinterland, the inland, with missiles and bombs.
Ukraine says that there are humanitarian corridors planned for civilians to be able to flee on Sunday today, and there's a renewed attempt to reach the besieged port of Mariupol. Has there been any progress on either of those things?
Well, these corridors, they seem to work from time to time on a smaller scale, but some of the worst hit cities, as Mariupol, have not yet been able to establish these corridors. The people there have been cut off from supplies and medical supplies, food, also infrastructure is destroyed, so there's a shortage of water, electricity is down for more than 10 days now, and I don't know whether this is going to happen today. It's failed every day. They try every day. The Russians promise to open a corridor, and then for some reason it collapses. There's shelling. The buses with medical goods that try to get into the city are shelled, or they can't even leave. So. I try to be optimistic, but it's hard to believe that today it will work.
President Zelensky, in his latest address to the nation, accused Russia of creating what he calls pseudo-republics in Ukraine. What does he mean by that?
Well, there have been news that Russia is planning to do a referendum on a republic in Kherson. This is the only major city that is controlled by the Russians, and these republics would be modeled on the two republics in Donetsk and Luhansk that the Russians have established in 2014. That means they would declare their autonomy or their independence, and they would establish a rule, most likely a military rule or some kind of dictatorship like they have in Donetsk. Russia would most probably recognize them, and they would split off the territory, because the Russian narrative is that Ukraine is not united, and that the people in the Russian-speaking regions are unhappy with being part of Ukraine and are seeking autonomy. This is not the case. We have seen demonstrations against Russian occupiers in Kherson, despite the risk and despite people having been arrested on these demonstrations. And as I'm hearing now, we are also seeing again demonstrations against these plans for a referendum. So a significant part of the population is completely against these Russian occupiers, but for the Russian justification of the war, this narrative is of course crucial, and they're going to push it through, it looks like.
All right, Matthias, thank you for that update. DW correspondent Matthias Bullinger in Kyiv. Last weekend in Kyiv alone, more than 80 babies were born in bomb shelters. The war is literally forcing expectant mothers and their newborns underground and into improvised maternity units. Matthias, who we just spoke to there, visited one such unit in the Ukrainian capital.
It's the first time that Maxim is seeing daylight. The boy was born a day earlier in the basement of Kyiv's maternity hospital number 5. His mother Natalia made sure to arrive at the hospital early. When the war began, the ambulances stopped running. Staying at home was frightening. We don't own a car and there are no ambulances. You don't know where to flee and what to do. Here I am fine. The nurses and doctors are next to me and can help me. Since the beginning of the war, the nurses and doctors have tried to make the clinic safe for wartime. Patients spent entire nights in the basements. Many children have been born in these improvised shelters. This is our emergency room. Here's the reanimation bed for newborn babies, and after operations and difficult births, they remain here under observation by doctors. We can deliver babies and do operations here and keep patients who need intensive care. Right now it is calm and many patients have been moved upstairs, but often it's easier for them to remain downstairs.
Just last night, there were 4 air raid alarms where people had to go down to the basement and come up after, and some of them had just an hour's break in between.
News of babies born in basements has touched many here in Ukraine, says the clinic's director. People come and bring bread and sweets. They don't even say who it's from. They just come and leave it at the security post for our employees, the doctors and those who take care of the young mothers. I think people who behave like this cannot be subdued.
Це дуже приємно і впевнений, такий народ подолати не можна ніколи.
Some patients have gone through quite an ordeal. Alina fled from one of Kiev's embattled suburbs just before her daughter was born. I feel fine now, but when I hear planes flying, I get nervous. We have all seen the images of the bombed maternity hospital in Mariupol. After seeing those images, I have been nervously listening to whether air raid sirens are going off or not. There's nothing I can do about it. Given the circumstances of her birth, Alina expects her daughter to be a tough girl.
Well, here's a look at some other developments in the conflict. France says Russian President Vladimir Putin is not willing to end the war in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz held joint telephone talks with Putin on Saturday. The two Western leaders urged Putin to agree to an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine and find a diplomatic solution. US President Joe Biden has authorised a further $200 million in new weapons to Ukraine, in addition to the $350 million it has already authorised for military equipment. It's the largest such package in US history. The move follows a raft of sanctions from Washington, including a ban on Russian vodka.
All of you. God bless you.
Italian police have seized a yacht worth 530 million euros owned by Russian oligarch Andrei Melnitchenko, in the port of Trieste. The billionaire was sanctioned in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Last week, Italian police seized several villas and yachts from 5 Russians on the EU's sanctions list. The UN says more than 2.5 million people have now fled Ukraine. More than half of them have crossed into neighbouring Poland. Now authorities in several cities there say they're running out of space. At the border, shelters have sprung up to accommodate people arriving exhausted after days on the road. They're mostly staffed by volunteers, offering what little comfort they can.
Even in war, children find moments of joy. In a playful fight with Polish volunteers, or in getting a lollipop. But for their mothers and everyone else, it is a reality far too difficult to ignore. Putin's army used tanks to attack my grandmother's house. We prayed to God to grant us a safe passage. It was very scary when the bombs hit our towns directly. We lost light, electricity and water. And at 5 in the morning, the bombs were falling again, right in the center of the city. They killed people. The bombs killed 21 people, including 3 children. I have nightmares when I think about it. In the small border village of Medica, Polish volunteers are doing what they can to support displaced families. They provide shelter, blankets, warm food, water, and often just human comfort. Ukraine has thanked Poland for its help. We are really very, very grateful to the Polish people for such strong support of Ukraine. It's also very important to the people who stayed behind in Ukraine, who are continuing this fight and will fight until victory, and also for those who come to Poland and need help and human warmth. But the volunteers aren't just Polish. People are pouring in from different parts of the world to lend a hand.
We're operating 24/7. We don't stop. The people, the refugees, are coming from 50 yards away, mostly women and children, old women, in a very sad state.
The UN estimates that more than 2.5 million Ukrainians have fled and rushed to get to neighboring countries. Poland is bearing the brunt of it, leaving it close to being overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the refugees do what they can to keep their children distracted.
And joining me now from Przemyśl on the Polish-Ukrainian border is DW's Brigitte Schulke. Brigitte, an unprecedented movement of people. More than 1.5 million refugees have crossed into Poland alone. How is the country managing?
Judging from what we have experiencing over the past days, I would say pretty well. I mean, in the first days it was a little bit chaotic for obvious reasons, but in the last day the help has been much better organized. People arriving here at the station in Przemyśl, where we are right now, they are immediately provided with all they need, like food, free SIM cards, advice where to go, and then they are very fast placed on buses and trains to relocate to other cities. But still, it's a huge challenge for everybody who's involved, and because the aid is still depending very much on volunteers. The mayor told us 1,200 volunteers are only here in Przemyśl. So also the community is reaching their limits. Just to give you an idea, this little city of Przemyśl, they have only 60,000 citizens, but they are welcoming 30,000 to 50,000 refugees every day.
And more people are expected, Brigitte. How are authorities preparing? They're already sending alarm bells saying that they're nearly at capacity. How are authorities preparing for more intake?
I mean, they are trying to ask the government for more funding, for more help, and also the volunteers try to stock up their forces. We saw a lot of signs at the border crossing saying, help is needed, we are looking for volunteers. They use social media to get people here to join in the relief effort.
What sort of support is Poland getting from other governments and from the EU?
I mean, they are asking, especially other governments, to really get support in relocating the people, because the mayor told us here in Przemyśl that is the thing which is most important. The problem here is that many people who are arriving here, they don't want to leave the country. They want to stay in Poland because then they are close to their loved ones who are still in the Ukraine. And so it's a little bit like a conflict. The authorities would like to send the people further away. Europe is willing to take them, but the people rather stay here.
And the people that you've been meeting and talking to there in Przemyśl, what kind of mental and physical state have they been in when they arrive in Poland?
Many people we have been talking to over the last days are heavily traumatized, because whereas in the first days people who came here had been able to flee the country before the actual war reached their neighborhoods. But people who are coming right now, they have been shelled, they had been in bunkers for days, then they tried to flee, they couldn't get out, some were shot at, so they're heavily traumatized and also disoriented and really not knowing where to go and what to do next.
Just shocking stories. Brigitte Schulke, thanks very much. As Russia expands its offensive in Ukraine, anti-war protesters have gathered in cities around the world. Across Europe, thousands have taken to the streets of Amsterdam, Vienna, Warsaw and Florence, while a group of Russian protesters gathered outside the Russian embassy in Madrid. Hundreds more rallied in the Israeli capital of Tel Aviv, calling on the Russian president to end the war. There's also a large demonstration taking place here in Berlin today, and DW's Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber is there. He joins me now. Benjamin, what's going on down there today? What's happening where you are?
As you can see behind me, people are still walking. They started at the Alexanderplatz Square, very typical square here in Berlin. They're walking towards Brandenburg Gate, calling for the end of war, also supporting the sanctions by the German government, by G7, by Germany, and asking for tougher sanctions when it comes to gas and oil imports for Russia. Some people are directly also asking for a no-fly zone, a NATO no-fly zone, and they're showing solidarity with the Ukrainian refugees who are coming to Berlin and to Germany.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about what the people there attending the demonstration today are demanding. I mean, you've mentioned some things there. Do you get a sense that they're generally in agreement with how the German government is handling the response, or you think that mainly they're calling for more to be done?
They're going for more, and they want to see a stricter play by the German government. They say when it comes, for example, to imports, when it comes to gas, when it comes to oil, Germany should take a stricter pause also with the imports, and they're also demanding more changes when it comes to the relation that the EU should take with Russia. That's what the people we've been speaking to here have told us.
Benjamin, as well as protesting, there's been a huge volunteer response here in Germany, particularly in Berlin, where a lot of people, we've seen all the pictures of people arriving at Berlin station. Tell us a bit about the aid effort here in the city.
That's right, it has been incredible. Yesterday evening I went to the central station here in Berlin, and a lot of volunteers are coming 24/7 to the station. Wood trains with people, with refugees from Ukraine are arriving, helping them with housing, helping them with food, and also helping them when it comes to translation. A lot of them are coming to Berlin to then continue the trip to other German cities, and it has been really incredible, and it reminds me of what we saw in 2015 with the Syrian refugee crisis. So a lot of them helping with accommodation, also pledging additional help for those fleeing terror and war right now.
DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber will speak to you during the day. Thanks very much.